Hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the political journalist at the Financial Times, Jasmine, Cameron-Chileshe, and deputy political editor at the Spectator and columnist at the Katy. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's have a look at what's on some of those front pages. The leads with the Ukraine crisis and Russia's move into the Donbass region. It says President Putin has taken Europe to the brink of war. In the Telegraph, US President Joe Biden says Russia has already started to invade Ukraine and is preparing to advance deeper into the country. The Mail has the same lead, with President Biden describing Putin as twisted and ready for bloodshed. This is the Times. West imposes sanctions as Biden warns of war. The Financial Times pictures Russian tanks on the border with Ukraine and says Vladimir Putin is backing the separatists' claims across the whole Donbass region, not just the parts they already hold. That, according to The Guardian, means the threat of war is growing. The Metro leads with the UK's sanctions against Russia with the headline, "We'll grab him by the rubles." The Star says that'll learn him. While The Express reports that more and even tougher sanctions are yet to follow. But The Mirror says many people are angry that not enough is being done to rid the UK of billions of dollars of dirty Russian money. And The Sun reports the government will send more weapons to Ukraine within days. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers, all whilst watching us. And tonight we are joined by Jasmine, Cameron-Chileshe and Katy. So let's get straight into the papers. There's a lot to talk about tonight, starting with the there in a really arresting front page with the Russian tanks on it. Putin takes Europe to the brink of war. Well, we heard from Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, earlier that this is the biggest threat to Europe since World War II. Is it the brink of war, Katy, or are we already there?
Well, we know things are not in a good place ultimately, and I think the question is just what exactly is Putin planning? And we're still not completely sure. I think that the problem is that the worst fears of NATO allies, the UK and the US, is that actually we could be heading to a much wider invasion than I think many had thought was a more likely solution. And while this has or approached by Russia, and I think while this initially began, with rebel-held territories, you can already see Putin expanding beyond that. And where does this all lead? And I think that there's a very ominous feeling in government here in London and Westminster tonight, and a sense that this is going to not end well, and we're heading to potentially, weeks and months of conflict.
Certainly some quite dark language on the front of the there. We are on the precipice of a dark and dangerous era, says the US. Full-scale invasion, all-out attack. It's that's the real question, isn't it, Jasmine, is how far Putin is going to go with this. And on the front of the Financial Times, Putin backs separatist claims to the whole Donbass region of Ukraine. Of course, we know now that the separatists only have a third of the Donbass region. Is this a pretext for Putin to go further? But how far?
I mean, quite possibly. And as Katy says, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to what Putin's calculating and what his intentions are for the region. But I think we got a sense of that in his quite rambling speech earlier in the week, where he basically tried to rewrite Ukrainian history and really undermine the sense that we've had since the Cold War, that European countries have a right to determine their own destinies and a right to determine their own democracies. And so the feeling is quite ominous. There is a sense that Putin's been quite calculated in how he's approached the situation, sort of taking small steps, escalating the crisis bit by bit, seeing how the Western allies will respond. And so he's giving Western countries in the Ukraine very limited options as days go by. There's a sense that the window for diplomacy and the window to de-escalate the situation is now sort of shrinking, and that this is all moving in one direction. And I think the sort of progression from supporting these rebel groups to actually taking over potentially larger chunks of territory sort of just shows the trajectory of travel at the moment.
Certainly not looking good. The Metro is leading on this as well, as so many of the papers are. We'll grab him by the rubles. I mean, it's a funny headline, but it's a really serious subject here. These are the sanctions. The UK, well, the West in general, imposing new sanctions. What do you make of the sanctions, Katy, that certainly the UK have imposed?
Well, I think the reaction has been one of almost, lots of people I think are underwhelmed. I think I would include many Tory MPs in that. Yes, a select number of banks and oligarchs have been named as those who will face sanctions. But if you look at the German response, and it's worth pointing out that the German government has been heavily criticised in recent weeks for not taking a tough enough stance on Russia. I think today the announcement that Nord Stream 2, the energy the pipeline, the gas pipeline is being stalled. You look at that, very drastic, has taken lots of people by surprise. And you look at the sanctions the UK is announcing, and it doesn't seem to match that if you think about the role the City of London plays when it comes to Russian money. Now, UK government sources say, well, this is just the beginning. We're doing this in stages. So there clearly is more to come. But I think right now, I think there are a few Tory MPs saying, well, this can't be it. The government does need to go further.
And funny enough, the Matt cartoon in the Telegraph invoking that same feeling. No Russian oligarchs, it says there. Of course, this sense that, well, certainly Bill Browder, the campaigner, the anti-corruption campaigner, has made it clear that the 3 oligarchs named by the UK in their sanctions have been on the US sanctions list since 2018. So he's calling those UK sanctions fairly tepid. Jasmine, what do you make of the sanctions, if they are your only tool? And at the moment, they are, because there's no indication, there is absolutely no intention to put boots on the ground. If sanctions are your only weapon, do you have to hold back the most important ones?
I think there is an argument for doing so, because at the point where they've definitely ruled out troops on the ground, there are only so many tools that they have at their disposal. But I think there is an argument that by imposing these sanctions that are quite weak compared to if we look at what Germany's done and what the US is suggesting, it does sort of undermine UK leadership on this. And it does potentially give Russian oligarchs and Russian businesses time to sort of move their finances and make arrangements so that even if tougher sanctions come, they've been forewarned of that. But I think there isn't, on the flip side, you can argue that actually the Kremlin has been quite firm and said that for every sanction, there's going to be retaliation. So whether that's cyber attacks or if we're looking at energy. And so perhaps a more slower, steady approach sort of gives the UK and Western allies to prepare for any sort of reprisals as well.
Yeah, I mean, there is the problem as well that any sanctions will hurt the UK and the US, the West, as much as they hurt Russia, potentially. The Daily Telegraph business page certainly has this: Putin attack intensifies living costs crisis for the UK. Katy, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that we've heard these warnings, and actually Boris Johnson, I think, has probably been one of the least direct leaders on talking about this. Joe Biden has been quite clear that if you impose sanctions, you too will feel some kickback from that, and I think that's something that we're clearly going to feel in terms of fuel, gas, lots of questions, and you're seeing warnings even from Russian politicians saying, well, this is the decision of Europeans to spend large sums of money on energy by taking these decisions. So there's clearly a trade-off. Is it avoidable? I think that clearly it's a very difficult situation, and it seems to be pretty inevitable this is going to happen if you are going to take a stance against Russia. As for what it's going to do, I mean, the difficulty is we're already heading to a cost of living crisis, probably going to start really feeling money still, but ultimately a lot of people are going to feel even more in the spring. And this is simply going to add to that further. And probably also, I think, speed up efforts to look for different energy supplies and so forth. But it's going to be painful. And that's before we even get to potential other ways this could kick back on us, such as potential cyber attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, we're going to have to leave Ukraine there for now. Plenty more to come later in the programme, including more on the leaked document that showed Scotland Yard questioned under caution those who attended those Downing Street parties. We'll have more on that with our guests after the break. Hello again. You're watching the press preview. With me now and all evening are political journalist at the Financial Times, Jasmine Cameron-Chileshe, and deputy political editor at the Spectator and columnist at the Eye, Katy. So back to our papers. And, well, I guess if you thought you could get through a day without talking about Partygate, you'll be sorely disappointed. But the front page of the Telegraph here, Downing Street party attendees questioned under police caution. Jasmine, why is that so important?
I mean, I think it really highlights the severity of the alleged rule breaking, and it speaks to whether there was criminality in some of these proceedings as well. And I think, as you said, we sort of thought that we'd got away from this story, but it's reared its head up again. And I think for Johnson, he's been preoccupied with Ukraine, and he's been able to point to Ukraine and say, you know, there's more important things going on. You know, we should be focusing on the situation in Europe, not whether or not I had a birthday cake or was in a room for 25 minutes. But this story really isn't going away. And we know that Johnson's handed in his questionnaire, and there are still some more people to hand their questionnaires in. And I think, you know, a big part of Johnson's political future is really riding on the outcome of this Met investigation and what is revealed in the updated Sue Gray report, which we're expecting after as well. And so I think this certainly isn't the end of this saga, and this is just one of the many twists to this story.
And it has, I mean, if it is under caution, if this is true, it's those immortal words, you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned, etc., etc., etc. To have that to a Prime Minister, I mean, when it happened, when Tony Blair was under investigation for cash for honours, he was told, apparently, according to this article, that if he was questioned under caution, it would be a resigning matter. Katy, is this a resigning matter for Boris Johnson? I mean, has it been a resigning matter all along?
Well, we know the Prime Minister doesn't plan to resign. I don't think that necessarily answers the question of whether it's a resigning matter, but not from Boris Johnson's perspective. I think that clearly it's serious, and this is a questionnaire, so we are taking from this, and this is the implication in the Telegraph and other papers, that this means the Prime Minister has been interviewed under caution. That is more serious in that case than what happened when it came to Tony Blair. But where does this all lead? I think it is quite tricky to predict right now, because when it comes to the Partygate story, it often comes in waves. Right now, I think the past week and a half, and we have been in recess, things have seemed calmer for the Prime Minister, but ultimately the police investigation is coming up the track. If he is fined, I think even if lots of younger staff members are fined and he is not, you know, all these scenarios are quite tricky for him. And ultimately, you then have the situation of, does the Prime Minister publish the Sue Gray report? He's suggested he will in the chamber. There's still some scepticism in government he's really going to publish the full thing. So there's lots of chances for the story to erupt again. And that's before you even get to Dominic Cummings, what he might blog or tweet, and potential leaks of various photos that we know the police have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, he's had enough to distract him for the moment. Thank you very much, Jasmine and Katy.